A filing by special counsel John Durham on Friday night confirmed what Donald Trump has been saying for years. Only it's actually worse than any of us ever thought. Hillary Clinton paid a tech company to infiltrate and essentially create and plant fake evidence of a Trump-Russia collusion link. And it wasn't just during the campaign. This tech company infiltrated the actual Trump White House, the computer servers, in an attempt to build up this whole fake narrative that Putin and Trump rigged the 2016 election. And now this has been called spying by most of the media. But in this instance, the hacking was done in order to essentially fabricate and plant evidence to further their fake narrative of the Trump-Russia collusion so that the Trump White House and the America First agenda could be undermined. So it wasn't spying. It was worse than spying. President Trump released a statement. He said this: "The latest pleading from special counsel Robert Durham provides indisputable evidence that my campaign and presidency were spied on by operatives paid by the Hillary Clinton campaign in an effort to develop a completely fabricated connection to Russia. This is a scandal far greater in scope and magnitude than Watergate, and those who were involved and knew about this spying operation should be subject to criminal prosecution. In a stronger period of time in our country, this crime would have been punishable by death." By death, folks. In addition, he said reparations should be paid to those in our country who've been damaged by this. Wow, a strong statement. I disagree with him on the spying part. Yes, it was spying, but it goes much farther than that. Congressman Matt Gaetz is here to react to all of this. Always great to see you. Happy. This is your first married Valentine's Day, right? With your beautiful wife, Ginger.
That's right, and yet I'm here with you, Dr. Gina, so we'll have to make it quick so that I can get on to my Valentine's Day duties. But this is very significant, what we're seeing from the Durham indictments, and I'm old enough to remember when you had the mainstream media and the left accusing Donald Trump of being a Russian agent, and they said that I was Putin's lawyer and worse, and yet here now we have the evidence that we were right all along, reflected in these indictments, where the very people who were working alongside the Hillary Clinton campaign were seeding lies with Russians who had connections to the Russian intelligence apparatus. And then this was what they linked it to: their effort to spy on the Trump campaign at Trump Tower, their effort to spy on the activities at the White House. And it was all to push something that was totally false. It was an attack on the presidency, and it's just quite something to hear these folks say that we're the insurrectionists, that we're the threats to democracy, when it was the political left willing to work with an adversarial foreign country to destabilize the Trump presidency.
It's really unfathomable. I almost don't even know where to start with this. I have so many questions, and I can't keep you all day because it's Valentine's Day. But put all of this into perspective for us, Congressman, because some, including Trump, are calling this worse than Watergate. This appears much worse than Watergate and much more ongoing, right? How bad is this? And if it really is treason, are death sentences even a possibility?
Treason is punishable by death. I think that the former president correctly observes that we're not at a time now where that would happen. And, that's because we've become more tolerant of these sophisticated spying operations. I mean, we just recently saw information about the CIA's collection of bulk data without obtaining a warrant, without going through the normal process that would adhere to our constitutional norms. But here specifically, it does appear that the crimes are worse than Watergate. They have a higher acuity, they have a higher sophistication. They're literally targeting the operations of the White House itself, and all to spread this lie that somehow Donald Trump was compromised by Russia. And, for those that are watching the globe right now, we might take note that Vladimir Putin invaded Crimea when Obama was president. Vladimir Putin may invade Ukraine with Joe Biden as president, but there wasn't that stuff happening when Donald Trump was president, and yet they were doing all this to try to smear Trump and to try to threat construct around Russia. Maybe the Trump years were some of the best relations that we had with Russia.
Yeah. It was interesting. I sent a video to my producers. I don't think that they put it in the show because I think I sent it on Friday. But it was a woman saying that she had worked hard for Hillary Clinton's campaign and that she thought when Donald Trump was elected, she was one of those crying that night, screaming on, as we watched different election parties for Hillary Clinton kind of melt down, right, all over the country. And she said she thought it would be Armageddon when Donald Trump was there, that she thought he would be a tyrannical dictator. And she sees now that it's actually the Democrats that are tyrannical dictators. You know, just note the fact that you only have to look as far as the fact that you have to show papers to go to dinner anymore in this country, thanks to the Democrats. But on this note, Congressman, I guess, you know, people who are patriots are so tired of watching our country be torn apart by a complete lack of accountability for anything remotely resembling the rule of law, right? They've just thrown that out the window. But no one is ever held accountable. We are tired of investigations that result in nothing, while we have, as you have brought to note, people sitting in jail still to this day for misdemeanors. You've been one of the only people doing anything about that who actually cares about those people sitting there for misdemeanors for more than a year, missing their Valentine's Day with their loved ones. They've missed Christmases, they've missed birthdays, they've missed weddings and funerals, and they called that an insurrection. Meanwhile, you have Democrat operatives who are never held accountable. Will anyone be held accountable? And further, I want you to advise this audience what they can do to be the uprising that makes this irresistible to resist punishing these people as the authorities have seemed to have done.
Well, we're for due process for everyone, and we see folks utilizing, their civil discourse and their right to peacefully protest from Ottawa, Canada to Jerusalem, really all over the globe right now. But it is also important to understand where the threat is coming from, creating that division that you referenced in the question. Here, the Durham indictments show the level of coordination between the DNC and some of the worst intelligence collection activities that were occurring to destabilize the presidency. But the FBI and the Department of Justice were not victims in this. And that's our job in the Congress to expose. They were part of seeding these lies and then distributing them through Department of Justice leaks, through people like Bruce Orr, through people like Andrew McCabe. And so we cannot just look at the Durham indictments as correctly identifying the corruption of the Clinton campaign. We also have to look beyond that to see that there really was an effort within our own government to allow this terrible smearing of the presidency. And I agree that the Russia hoax was far more of an insurrection than anything we saw on January 6th.
Yeah. My background is psychology, Congressman, and I like to study the intersection of psychology and politics. And we really are in a situation psychologically and politically that is so scary if people stop and think about it. I think the Democrats, evidenced by them going to this length, right? Evidenced by what they did, all the shenanigans in the last election, evidenced by the ongoing criminal behavior that they absolutely get away with over and over again. They don't believe they can win based on their values, ideals, and merits, right? So they think the only way that they can win is to steal and to commit crimes and to perpetrate lies on the American public and to commit treason. So if Hillary and the establishment left in D.C. will go to these lengths to commit treason by infiltrating the White House computer servers and the computers of their opponent's campaign, can we assume that they would try to rig an election again also?
Oh, I believe that many of the really improper actions of elections officials in the 2020 election will be institutionalized, scaled, and repeated in the 2022 election if you don't have certain officials fired and removed, and in some cases facing restraining orders from judges. We should not have elections in this country where the ballots are not actually connected to a human being's intent to vote. And in far too many cases, that did happen in the last election. But what the Durham indictments show us is that there is a disregard for the outcome of the election on the left if it doesn't mean they retain power. They weren't just spying on the Trump campaign. They were spying on the incoming president in the White House. And that's what I think carries this to proper comparisons to treason, because they really were attacking our country, our institutions. And all the while, they were doing this, you had Democrats in Congress objecting to the state of Alabama in 2017 being registered for Donald Trump, a state I think Trump won by more than 40 points. And yet they want to say that people like Jim Jordan, myself, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who objected to electors from states where elections weren't clean, that's somehow this like terrible taint on the republic. Give me a break. Now these people are being exposed. And I remember when I said it was Hillary Clinton and her campaign engaged in the illegal acts, everybody on the mainstream media said I was a conspiracy theorist, I was wearing a tinfoil hat, and now the Durham indictments are bearing out the very things that we told the country were happening. If we get power back, we have to use that power to expose all the corruption in this illegitimate regime. And I think that ought to be the unifying, organizing principle of the Republicans heading into the midterms.
This ties into the January 6th sham committee, of course, the effort to destroy Trump by any means possible, started with Hillary and the deep state. And now Liz Cheney and Kinzinger have taken up the anti-Trump mantle to destroy Trump at any cost and to destroy the America First agenda at any cost. But I don't think that the American voter is falling for this. What is your read on that?
Well, I think all throughout the country right now, we are engaging in primary season. The first primaries in the country began in March in Texas. They run through the August primaries in New Hampshire. And that is really where we define what the Republican Party will care about and fight for. And I don't think it can just be a message about inflation. I think there is a culture war going on in America, and we've got to take the side of people who don't want their kids being taught critical race theory, who don't want to have their jobs and their careers and their livelihoods subject to fleeting mandates that seem to bear no relationship to science. And they want to know that the Republicans that they elect will actually fight for them and go to battle and not just join up with the Democrats as some sort of uniparty in Washington, D.C. To advance American decline so long as the elites are doing well. So I think that's really what's at stake, beginning in March, rolling through August. And it's one of the reasons why Marjorie Taylor Greene and I are traveling the country, endorsing candidates, because we need backup. We need more of the Madison Cawthorns and the Lauren Boeberts and the Lance Goodens and the Andy Biggses in Congress so that we can have a critical mass to be that guiding force within the Republican conference when we're back in power, back with the ability to hold this regime accountable.
It's hard to believe, Congressman, that this administration would go as far as to use something like a war, an invasion, to distract from the revelation that Trump was spied upon and the White House servers were infiltrated. But it sure seems like the Biden administration wants war right now, doesn't it?
I mean, the Biden administration is gaslighting this war so much, you have to wonder if Putin doesn't invade, will they? I mean, I say that in jest. But I mean, when Jake Sullivan on Sunday goes out and says, I want to be clear that we will specifically defend NATO countries. Well, he's gaslighting an invasion of Ukraine when he does that, because he's expressly saying what we won't defend against, right? And there was an element of Trump's lack of predictability that really kept our enemies on their heels more. I mean, Putin would not be doing this if Donald Trump were still the president of the United States, because he wouldn't really know how Donald Trump would react. And that lack of predictability gave the United States the upper hand, in places like in Syria, where when there was this chemical weapons attack, there was like a clear, direct response. And then you didn't see a whole lot more of that going on in Syria on a going forward basis. So the Trump doctrine that actually leans into the real world is one that we should return to. This like establishment pro-war, neoconservative, but at the same time utterly incompetent Biden mess is not something I think a lot of Americans are going to embrace.
And you have Donald Trump, who, of course, gave way to the populist movement that has now spread across the world. And up in Canada, the establishment there must be taking lessons from the American political establishment, because the Canadian truckers are being called puppets of Putin. Watch this clip from the Canadian News Network, CBC.
Even after 2 weeks of chaos, it's still unclear exactly who is behind the so-called truckers' convoy. But it's clear they're well connected. As police in Ottawa clamped down on Parliament Hill, other protests began popping up across Ontario and elsewhere. Earlier today, I spoke with New Brunswick cybersecurity expert David Shipley, who says Canadian protesters are being directed and manipulated by foreign agents.
Who would have reason right now to cause as much chaos in Canada as possible? Well, top of that list is Russia. we are actively engaged in a geopolitical battle about the future of the Ukraine. Our foreign affairs minister, our prime minister, others have been very vocal in our support for the Ukraine. And it seems very likely that the tactics that we're seeing, the creation of these massive Facebook groups using fake identities, or in the case now alleged by a U.S. media outlet, a stolen identity of a Missouri woman, to create these groups and to foster communication amongst hundreds of thousands of people. This is the Russian Internet Research Agency playbook writ large.
Congressman, it's the same playbook. Russia, Russia, Russia. They have no concept. I guess they never took any of the classes I took in college about proletariat uprisings and uprisings of people that are based on actual grassroots. They are so sure that, I don't know, Matt Gaetz is behind this or Putin is behind this. Somebody's behind this, because it can't possibly be people just rising up as populists demanding their rights.
Yeah, the thing about populism is it turns out to be quite popular. And there are more of us than there are of them. And that's why the elites in the regime try to use these exquisite national security tools to label us all domestic terrorists so that they can limit our ability to organize and have our voices heard. I mean, I saw earlier they tried to blame the Canadian truckers on their roots in white supremacy. Then it was the Confederacy. Now it's the Russians. Who knows? Next week it might be the Illuminati or Tupac that they say are driving the Canadian truckers. The reality is it is a desire for freedom. And the consent of the governed is still something that is necessary in a republic. And it is fragile, and it must be nurtured, and it must be respected. And trust between the governed and our elected representatives is developed through a series of promises kept. And I think there are a lot of people all over the world right now feeling like their government doesn't deserve that trust, because so many of these mandates are ever changing, yet the impacts on people's lives are forever. I support the Canadian truckers. We may see more out of some American truckers. And don't be surprised when the left claims that it's everything other than their bad policies that are creating these movements.
Absolutely. Congressman Matt Gaetz, it's always great to see you out there fighting like you do. I know my audience appreciates you, and we appreciate you being with us. Come back soon.
Thank you, and happy Valentine's Day to everyone. I don't know whether to say you're welcome or I'm sorry if you're currently watching and spending Valentine's Day with me and Dr. Gina.
Well, maybe they did a great romantic lunch. You never know. It could be like that. So anyway, thank you so much, Congressman.